All right, well, welcome everyone to the first Q&A to accompany recycled screenings. I'm hesitant to give an introduction to what recycled screenings is because I don't really have a clue of what it is, which I think is kind of the fun of it. But the idea essentially came about because I'm Will DeGravio, joined today by Scout Tafoya.
Hello.
And for a few years now, I've hosted something called the Video Essay Podcast, which Scout was a guest on, talking about video essays and all the fun stuff going on there. And just over the years to those conversations, it kind of became clear to me like, it would be kind of cool to have a curated option where people could kind of go once a month and check out a new work and have that work be presented in some context. And the other thing that I noticed in kind of hosting the quote unquote video essay podcast is that all of the works that we might think of as video essay, those boundaries are super porous and changing. And I like bringing together found footage filmmakers and experimental filmmakers and people who make like kind of explicit like video essays in the sense like, here's my thesis and I'm going to demonstrate it to you in XYZ. And I had this idea a few months ago, and Scout was one of the people I emailed. I was like, hey, what do you think about this? Little did Scout know that as soon as he gave the green light, I knew that he would be my first guest on this. It's kind of kind of an easy decision because Scout, I'm not even going to give a bio because we'll be here all day. But I think for me, just the video essays on rogerebert.com, but then your film writing and then the feature experimental work that you release on your own and screen elsewhere. And I was thinking like maybe perhaps my sense is that people will know you best from your video essay work, um and like kind of your duties as a film critic. But I think in so much of the other work that you do, all of them kind of come into one. And so when I reached out to you, I knew that you would have some kind of work to show. And then it was
Oh
this, and
yeah.
I was like, oh my God, I see all of the different areas of your work coming together in Xenolith Atlas. So super excited to be the world premiere of this film on
That's right.
recycled screenings, and to have you here with me today to talk about it. So thank you so much and welcome.
Thanks for having me. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Like you don't ever really want to spend time thinking about how other people think about you because that will lies madness. Certainly, especially when you're involved in art criticism, which is like the easiest way to make enemies is to take, take your job seriously as an art critic, because inevitably you're going to hate things that people love and you're going to do your best to articulate why something doesn't work. I mean, that's not the only part of the job, but it's an important part of the job. And that's a great way to make sure that people are looking at you down their nose, which is perfectly fine. I don't care about that so much, but I bring that up only because I don't, while I'm approaching any of the stuff that I do, give primacy to this or that thing. It all just kind of happens when it happens, where it's like, I do like music stuff too, and I know that nobody follows that. That's like very much just a for me thing. But it's very funny to be like taking that as seriously one day as I do something that people will actually read. Like hopefully,
Right.
where you spend all day working on one song that nobody cares. It's just like that's kind of always been the approach to everything. There's just you are whatever needs getting done, whatever needs to get done that day. That's kind of how I think about all that stuff. So yeah, there's certainly no shortage of stuff to go find between the music and the movies and the books and the written stuff and the criticism, the video as a blah 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 blah. So like yeah, it's a lot of stuff, but it's also, I think, good to kind of remind yourself that not everything gets the same traction, because it will definitely stop you from taking yourself too seriously.
Well, I think, it's funny, like when I follow your work, like it's interesting to me because it's like I'm following so on Scout's Patreon, which everyone should check out. It's like I'll wake up in the morning and you'll have, you're going through John Ford's filmography, for example. And so I'll wake up and I'm like, oh, Scott has new thoughts on a John Ford film I've never seen before. Like, great. And then we have a film like this, which
Yeah.
is, I think just shows the range. And of course, the people who are interested in like experimental cinema are probably the same people who are interested in like classical Hollywood and film history. So it all kind of comes together in your work. But let's talk about this film for a second. And, without getting too into the weeds of it, because I think we could be here all day for that. But give me the kind of the bird's eye view, if you will, of this film. What is it, and how do you think about it in terms of kind of what we're talking about here in your work as an artist and a critic and a filmmaker and everything?
So, and I have to assume that a million experimental filmmakers have something similar. I know I've seen dozens of them at this point, but it is on its face, it was my COVID movie. It was the thing that I did when I couldn't do anything else. And a big part of and again, I can't imagine this was unique to me, even for a second. The thing that really got me down more than, not being able to leave your apartment, not being able to see your friends, not being able to go to the movies, not being able to go to restaurants, not being able to just take part in the rituals of life that, can give it its spark and its meaning. The thing that really, really bothered me was that I couldn't make movies. It's like few things kind of center you and excite you and can be, terrible experiences, can be depressing experiences, but are almost always enlightening experiences, is being on film sets. Me and my dear friends who've been helping me do this for upwards of a decade at this point, we usually get together once every few years, or hopefully once a year if we can manage it, but it's difficult with everybody's schedule, and we'll go to whatever the location is and we'll make the movie over a couple of days. And it's the most fun and exciting. It's just like it's one of those, like, this is why I'm here kind of a thing. Like, this is why it's good to be alive, because there is no other experience like being on a film set with people who are there to make the movie the way that you are, and bringing their own, life experience and talent and perspective to, like, it's just the most exciting thing I've ever been able to take part in. And couldn't do it. I kept getting ideas. I wrote like a dozen screenplays and couldn't make any of them. And so during that period, you're taking footage of things for later, or just to have, or because you see something cool. And so as I'm collecting these things and I'm going through a backlog of like sort of home video footage, um I start kind of trying to piece together what this could be, and I had an idea that it was going to be like a sort of a more meta thing about trying to make a video essay during the pandemic, but I couldn't quite draw the thematic strands together to the point where it made sense, because I kept looking for a filmmaker that I thought would make for a good sort of focal point for that, as somebody who's kind of a mirror to all that. And like, I could have done Faroki, but I feel like he already did that work. You know what I mean? Like, it felt kind of, I don't know, wrong to take somebody who was already so uh uh inside his own head, in a way that, like, when you watch that work, you're getting to know the way that this man thinks. And that struck me as almost like too perfect to be personal, because everybody has a relationship to him and it's their relationship to him. So I was looking for somebody who was kind of more fringe. That didn't work. So finally I just kind of said, think about the shape later, just get all the footage that you need and the things that you're thinking. And then a couple of months ago, my friend Daniel Kramer, who's also a video essayist and does a lot of scholarly commentary work for Blu-ray releases and things like that, and he's a filmmaker too in his own right, and he came to town and asked if I was working on anything. And I realized I hadn't finished this movie. I was like, yeah, I am. So I wrote the I wrote the narration on my phone as I was walking to meet him. We got a drink at the Cambridge Brewing Company a couple of minutes from my house, and by the time I got there, I had it finished. We sat and we hung out. He and his I think fiance at this point, Evan, and we all hung out. We got some drinks, and then Evan went home. Daniel came back here, and we recorded the narration, and then he went on his way. And I put it together there. And so with the kind of 12-month structure as my kind of organizing principle, I put together this thing of, it's the first year of COVID, and it's this couple, and they're fracturing and splintering, and I kind of use that as my thing. So then it's my voice and it's Daniel's voice, so it's the two people sort of telling the story at the same time, of their relationship, kind of not working, and how it's being affected by being trapped with each other. I think a lot of people probably can relate to that. It's not autobiographical because my all things considered, my social experience of COVID was fairly okay. You know, there were like ups and downs with a lot of people that I'm very close to, but it certainly could have been 10,000 times worse. And you know, I was living with my ex girlfriend at the time, and we actually did perfectly fine throughout COVID, which was nice. Um, and you know, so like there basically, but like seeing glimpses of everyone else's lives and the things that could go wrong at any moment, which is something you're always aware of. Um, and it was yeah it was so that's basically it's a COVID diary, but it's also this kind of exploration of two people getting through it and reminiscing and trying to move forward at the same time. And it's yeah so it's got a very very loose plot, but it's not really a movie with it's not a drama or anything like that. It's very much an experimental work. And you know, I got to sort of mess around with editing techniques, and I got to pull strange things from that period that I think are important to hold on to, like Godard's last interview on that Instagram live stream. um, and just kind of hold on to the totems of that time while trying to let go of the emotion of it and just how truly truly depressing that period was. um, and Yeah, so it's certainly more to the sort of harder avant-garde spectrum than a lot of what I do, but a couple of my fiction films lean pretty hard into the tradition of experimental filmmaking anyway. So to me, it wasn't a total departure or anything like that. Certainly, like you know, my kind of jokey Michael Snowman movie from a couple of years ago is like you know pretty hard into plotlessness as well, and it's also kind of a you know just a joke, but that was fun to do, and it just kind of frees you up to be like you don't be afraid of what you know where your brain is taking you know that it
Right.
seems at one point that you're going to edit a movie and it's going to be very straightforward, and then you get there and it's like you know actually it's much more fun if we do it this other way that makes less sense intuitively but more sense in the moment.
To that point, when I think about your video essay work, which is the work that you and I have talked about kind of the most in the past, and your essay film work and everything, is I wrote a curator statement that accompanies this, and I wrote that
Which is
before.
so nice, by the
Oh
way.
well.
That was like the nicest thing I've ever read. Thank you so much for
Oh my
that.
God, no, it was easy to write and all true. But I had written it before you sent in your statement, in which I had said to you that when I think of you, I think of you as a kind of diarist, and that's what I feel in watching your work, and that it doesn't it feels on the one hand so personal, and there are some videos that are just like you can clear, and this is not to say that these are good or bad, I'm not making a value judgment, but some it's like someone spent you know months and months making this totally polished and perfect and thinking through every single word. In yours, your practice is just different than that, and it's so that's why I love it. It feels it's so personal. And um you mentioned George Kuchar, and I fell in love with his work this year. So that like sent a chill up my spine. I was like, oh my God, that's why I'm like, I never made the connection. I was like, that's why I love both of these guys and what they do so much. And so, but could you just walk us through, you alluded to it briefly there, but just the process of essentially keeping this diary, of assembling it, of going back through what you made, because it's interesting hearing you talk about it, because on the one hand you have what would be considered found footage, right? Work that you're, whether it's the Godard, it could be the Godard Instagram interview. But then you have your own footage. But in a way, it sounds like you almost get to treat your own footage as if it is found footage to a degree, and that you're going through and finding new context in it. You didn't shoot it for a particular, you didn't exactly know how it would function in the end result as you were shooting it. So walk us through your creative process there, and just kind of assembling and keeping this diary.
Yeah. I mean, it was as with all things, it's a matter of what's interesting. You know, like a lot of the stuff was from trips I had taken over the last 5 years, or you know, in the case of the final minutes, is the kind of the first big concert I'd been to since the start of COVID, which is Zola Jesus and the Cult and Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, and just sort of like the you know the I mean, there was like terror certainly being back around that many people, but there was also sort of a release and a kind of a freedom there. So it was like that to me was thematically important, as this thing where it's like you're back in the open again. But also, I had a lot more footage from all that stuff than what I used because it was a matter of what looked good and how much of it, you know. And so like I kind of to keep myself from taking too many cell phone videos, deliberately didn't spring for a nice cell phone camera years and years and years ago when I was getting this phone, which is now 1,000 years old. This thing, they were like, "Do you want we got this like brand new, really nice camera?" And I'm thinking like, "Yeah, I do want that," but also I, at the best of times, can't focus on what I'm doing. I have to make a concerted effort to put my phone fucking down for a minute and actually be present with, you know, whatever the thing is. And, you know, I, my like current lock screen right now, and this is kind of funny for all the Ford stuff, is Monument Valley. I went to Monument Valley with my dad a couple of years back. And actually we're going again, which is very exciting. It's just such a breathtaking place to be. And the thing that I like was aware that I was doing was I was taking pictures of every vista, and I'm like, you gotta stop. You gotta like just take it in. Like, yeah, you can appreciate it certainly, and it's not bad to take one or two pictures, but it's like I know how bad I am with my attention span and being online and being on the phone, and it's just like you want to not constantly do that. And so by deliberately hamstringing myself here, by not making myself able to take 1080 4K video every time I leave my house, I'm making myself be more selective about what I want to capture because I know that the image won't be perfect. So it's like, can you make this kind of slightly low grade camera make an image that still speaks to you, and is it worth it to keep looking for that stuff? And so that is a big part of how I decided to keep the images that I kept. And and it also kind of brought out, you know, it's funny, like I'll circle back to the Kachar thing in a minute, but like it makes you want to reach for things that are best suited by the quality of the image where it's not perfect, and so it should be capturing things that itself is not perfect. There should be an uncanniness to it. Like taking the boat to the Rockaways. I lived in Queens throughout the pandemic, and one day took a boat to Far Rockaway. And so on the way back, I hadn't taken any images on the way there, and I didn't really take anything on the island itself. But on the way back, we're going into this pink sunset, this beautiful, and I was like, all right, well, now I have to do this. And so the oddness of the camera trying to make sense of this explosion of color, and just like I love the sea, I love being at sea. I don't, you know, this is a thing I'm learning about myself. And so you know, I started to just have a feeling of like, you know, this particular moment, this particular image, this stuff seems like it's something that you need to hang on to. And it was just kind of a sixth sense with that, where like, for instance, the stuff with the zoo and all that, like that was the same kind of thing. It was like, there's something very bizarre about that. That's a zoo for animals that were confiscated from people in Jersey, that they bought exotic animals and they couldn't handle them.
Oh wow.
So it was like all these big cats and stuff. And you're like, so you like got this out of some drug dealer's mansion in in Hoboken or whatever.
Poor animals,
Like,
yeah.
I know. And so that's why they all kind of have a sad quality to them, is because they were all
Yeah.
confiscated.
Yeah.
And so that kind of, you know, going into the camera as well, it's like, thank God they're not, you know, cramped in somebody's house anymore. But at the same
Yeah.
time, like they don't belong here at all. And that, of course, is an all too handy metaphor for everybody
Yeah.
being trapped in their houses. Is belong
Yeah.
here. You were not supposed to spend this much time trapped. I was very fortunate that I met George Kuchar before he passed away. He came to Emerson College and had a kind of a few days residency or something. We showed a couple of his works. There was a New Weather Diary. There was a thing of him walking around Boston in 2005, 2006. There's a bit where he goes to the film producer and director Andrew Van Houten's house and hangs out with him for a bit. I guess they corresponded or something. I mean, Andrew certainly has a kind of a nose for the not quite avant-garde, but certainly the kind of American grotesque.
Yeah.
And George made that stuff really, really beautifully. And so sitting with elderly George Kuchar watching movies both from his distant past and from a couple of years ago, you're realizing that this guy kind of held on to everything. And you know why when you talk to him. It's the way that his brain works.
Yeah.
It's the way that he relates to the world is with the camera first. And it was really, really beautiful and humbling to be sitting next to this guy who had no um he had no sense of superiority. He had no sense of himself as an artist. Even I would venture to say that it was just he was who he was, and he was somebody who had captured all these things in a way that no one else would. And I think he at least understood that his mind was not like other people's. And what a beautiful thing that was to spend time with him, and just to hear him talk and to converse with him for a few minutes every little while was just wild. And just a man with no self-consciousness whatsoever. No, he filmed everything he did, and he filmed his own body, and he filmed, it was just, that's I think it was good to have in the back of my head to like not be afraid of anything, not to like I'll never have George's fearlessness, because it was only his, and certainly there will never be another one. And but it was nice to be thinking about that. It's like, okay, this guy lived to be, I want to say, almost 70, if not older than 70, and he was still just filming everything that he did. He was filming his body. He was leaving behind a living record of himself through his images, and that changed from 8mm to 16mm back to digital camera and all. And it was just like, yeah, that to have that kind of offbeat sensibility that he had. Certainly he and Mike, his brother, created these kind of faux melodramas, which are beautiful in this kind of Jack Smith kind of tradition. And so it was like, okay, so maybe the approach here is, you're telling this kind of Kucharian melodramatic story from some of the early work, but you're doing it in the diaristic fashion that you adduce from the more silent works that he did, the more low key pared down work, the later work that not a lot of people have seen. Someday there will be a great box set. I'm confident with all of his later work. I mean, there's so much of it. You have to really, really take that project seriously. But yeah, I mean, and in that way, it allows you to step outside of the experience of you making the footage and just be like, okay, well, here it is. This is what you've got. This is the footage that you have, and treating it like somebody else has given you these things, which is the only way that you're going to make editorial sense out of it. Because, I mean, certainly, God knows I'm so precious about everything I shoot during the fiction shoots that it sometimes takes years to get a film to a point where you're actually at peace with how it is, because the things just keep moving and changing, and you think you've got a good cut, and then you watch it 2 years later and you're like, no, thank God I didn't release this because I need to fix it. Like I have a bunch of movies at festivals now, and I think I find like one of them is like 7 years in the making, 8 years in the making, something like that. And I'm really grateful that I had as long as I had to kind of figure out certain aspects of it, because there's a lot of moving pieces, and that's that's you have to think about, am I still going to want to watch this? That's really the most important factor about all this stuff is, and it's true of everything that I do, are you going to want to revisit this? Are you going to want to approach this? Are you going to be at peace with what it is? Because years from now you're going to put it on for somebody when somebody asks you, like, do you have whatever the prompt is, and is the movie going to be in good enough shape that you're going to still love watching it? And that's the thing that I've always tried to do, and it took me again a long time to kind of get there. That it wasn't, I'm not making this because I needed to break through, because that's just never going to happen. I'm going to mean something to the people who watch it, and that'll be that. And then the rest of it is, do you want to watch it? Do you want to listen to this? Do you want to read this again? That's like going through the Ford stuff, and that'll be out in book form in spring, and I've had to reread it a million times just for editing purposes and layout purposes and fact checking and all this stuff, and just being like, okay, I still like reading this, which is so important. Right. Like the Hooper thing, I want to put out a new edition of the Toby Hooper book, because every time I pick it up I find something and I'm like, oh, you could have done that better. You really could have done that better.
Well, I hadn't
But
realized that the Ford stuff was going to be in book form, so I
yeah,
will eagerly awaiting that. It's funny you mentioned the concert at the end. Um,
yes,
I felt that catharsis, I think, because it's one of the few moments in the film where the full screen is taken up by the image. And
yeah,
I kept coming. It was funny before we even got to those poor animals in the cages. I felt like I was in a cage throughout. I mean, the vertical lines, the framing, the Instagram shots, the insistence on your part to shoot in vertical from the iPhone, like looking out windows in cityscapes. I mean, it was crazy. Then the concert at the end, and it felt like I felt it, but then there was also this kind of uneasiness to it that now hearing you talk about is your first time coming out of the pandemic, and um, when you're going through kind of when you're thinking through in that way, are you just assembling this in your editing program and kind of just seeing what works? Is that your approach, or are you sketching this out? Like, how are you physically moving the material around and kind of going through everything?
yeah. It's I to me it was one of the first times that I've ever been like kind of completely free about what goes where. And so I kind of liken it to you throw a bunch of paint up there and you don't like it, so you fix it and you cover it over with something else after, like Nick Nolte and Life Lessons. And that was the fun of it, was you put things down and you obviously just have to start somewhere. So I grabbed some stuff. I think I went as far back as the record would go. And so then you kind of realize what you have. And so I realized I had the image of the plane. I forget where I was going when I did that. It could have been any number of places. But I'm like, okay, well that's your bookend then, which then gives you a whole lot of space in between. Is the whole thing is about momentum. We're trying to preserve momentum because you can't go anywhere. You're trapped. You can rent a car for a day, but you got to go back. You can't just keep going. You got to go back to your apartment at some point. um and so it was a lot of that kind of sensation of trying not to go crazy, so giving yourself things to do. And like during that period, I did a job for Matt Zoller sites where I would drive boxes of books around New York and have the authors sign them, which was kind of interesting. You get to see how everybody else is surviving
Yeah.
pandemic. uh, Off air I'll tell you how everybody lives. But no, I so that you put things down and you sort of see how they flow into each other, and you kind of know right away whether or not it works or it doesn't. It's just a matter of, okay, this image doesn't go into this or this goes into that. And then I had clusters of things, like I had the hotel and I had the zoo and I had I had the boat. And so you just sort of you pair those things off to each other. You sort of figure out what the design of it is going to be, and you want to withhold some of the best images for later, so that there are tides to the thing. It's an experience that kind of, you still want it to have that kind of mise en scène, even though it's
Right.
not a film that operates traditionally in basically any fashion. But you still want to sort of pull people along with you. It's your 1 minute you're on the phone and you're seeing what other people are doing, and you're scrolling through Instagram. Certainly, that's what we all did. And that, so that gets its own section of the foundness of that, and the kind of bizarre juxtapositions of, you're listening to music through your thing and you come on an Instagram video that has its own audio and all like that. To try to really get into that, kind of like a Namjoon Pike sort of a thing, or a DJ or whatever, to just sort of put together a million different versions of what it was like looking at screens during that period. And then you go out of the house, but it's still through the screen, which is its own kind of prison, like you're saying. And so you're bringing back this evidence of life continuing in bowdlerized form, outside of your own experience, and you're bringing it back, and you're realizing that there's always going to be the bars or the screen between you and the thing as an artist. And that's kind of a dispiriting revelation, but it also frees you in a lot of ways, because you know that you're never going to capture the thing itself. And so the simulacra of it is now yours to throw up on the canvas and see how that works. And that the feeling of it for sure is of being trapped. That was absolutely, it wasn't anything that I set out to do, but the second it started, it's like, yeah, no, this is this is a movie about claustrophobia.
Yeah.
Being stuck in cars, being trapped 100 feet from something, and then the kind of other little bizarre things that I had captured over the years that I had been waiting to find some kind of a home for, and then realizing that they worked in here. Like there's that horrifying little robot animal band at Ocean City, New Jersey.
Oh yeah.
It's like off-brand Chuck E. Cheese entertainment band.
That was terrifying.
Yeah, it's not good, is it? But I had that on my phone for years. I'm like, this is too good not to use. I just need to find it. And then when you get into this headspace that's like, you want so desperately to not be where you are, and then you think you're adult, you're a little kid, and it's time to go, and you can't go, and your parents are like, look at that, isn't that entertaining? Like, shut up and leave me alone. I got my own problems.
I love that. You mentioned, first, this will just be the last question. I just want to remind everyone to please watch the film. If you're watching this, it's embedded on the webpage, or if you're somehow finding this video elsewhere, recycledscreenings.com. There's an option to make a donation. But again, this film will be totally free to watch until the end of January 2023. And Scout, I just want to kind of ask you in the few minutes we have less here, because I don't have a premium account and I'm seeing the clock is ticking. That's why I need some donations. Let me upgrade a premium account.
There you go. Pay for that premium account, people.
My question to you is, you just kind of talked about this ebb and flow and in kind of the experience of creating for the audience. And so for this piece for you, it is deeply personal, like so much of what you do. And diaries aren't necessarily always meant for public consumption, right? And so what is it, how does it feel for you to kind of have this out there into the world now? And I think about it in the sense that it's interesting because I'm seeing all these pandemic diaries, and yet the pandemic is still here. And of course, we're better at managing it in some ways, but it's like we're in this very in between kind of time. And so I think it's very interesting to watch a work like yours now, specifically to kind of, I think it's important to not already forget where we were a couple of years ago. And that feeling. And so if you could just talk about that, I'd be curious just to close this out here.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, we're in a peculiar time, where people are kind of demanding more of culture than they ever had before, because there are more people consuming it than ever before. And so people aren't satisfied with the white, cis, hetero structure that gave us culture for so many years in America. And so they're demanding new things about it. But also, I think it is incredibly important to remember how bad things were. I think it is so important to keep records of all that stuff and to not simply throw out things that make us feel uncomfortable, because we need a complete record of who we were and where we were and how far and how long we had to go to get to this point where where we can be this much more honest. A couple of years ago, I released a movie that you can still, I think you can get it on Vimeo on demand for like $2 or something like that, called "She Held Me Close and Whispered Kill Me," and that started out again as a much more traditional thing, and then I just kept collecting bits and pieces of movies that we didn't make. And in that comes the inevitable thing of, you didn't finish this because this person stopped talking to you. You didn't finish this because you were depressed. You didn't finish this because, you ran out of money or somebody got sick. And it's like, part of that is like, okay, if you're going to make movies and you're going to put other people's performances on there, you have to also be willing to put yourself on the line in that way. And you have to really be willing to lay yourself bare as possible. And while, unlike the Kuchars, I've never been naked in my own movies, you do kind of want to be, metaphorically naked in front of everybody, because how else does anybody know that you really mean this, that you're serious about what you do, that this is not just something that you're doing to get somewhere with your career? You're doing it because you have to. You're doing it because this is who you were and this is where you were. And, you know, if nothing else, my combined body of work will be, I mean, certainly it'll be a record of my, you know, state of being and what it was like to be a struggling artist and critic and whatever during this period of time. But it's also, you know, it's my attempt to kind of leave it all there. Is that, like, I sometimes have a hard time talking about my feelings with people. You know, I've had inconclusive patchy relationships to therapy, but it's like, this is where it goes. This is where it all goes. It all goes into the work. And whether that's a video essay about a TV show or a movie that kind of is much more, you know, transparent about everything that I'm going through, you know, that is the work. It's like the thing is, like, I think all the time is like, you know, oh, should you be like, remember, like, I unfortunately remember basically every embarrassing thing that's ever happened to me. I have a
Same.
photographic memory when it comes to being humiliated. And it's like, yeah, you could write a book and all that stuff, but you could also just put it into the work, because
Yeah.
that to me is going to be more interesting than just sort of like saying it as it is, because I would not know how to stop including everything. And so it's like, well, if it shows up in the work, then it was meant to come out. And that's kind of, there it is.
Yeah.
So I have to be at peace with all this stuff, because it was who I was, and
Yeah.
you know, who I may continue to be. And yeah, there it is.
Well, it's a beautiful work, and thank you so much for sharing it with all of us. And it's an honor to have it be the
Thanks.
first. So thank you so much, Scout.
Thank you so much, Will. This was a real pleasure.